Hi everyone, today I'm going to take you through painting this Four Seasons tree painting. Each panel represents one of the four seasons: summer, winter, spring and autumn. And you'll probably need some painter's tape for this. You don't absolutely have to have it. You can divide your canvas up into four sections and just paint really carefully. If you do have painter's tape or masking tape, that will be helpful when you are painting each section, because it just stops bleeding and it stops you from accidentally putting paint on a different part of the canvas. All right, here's some of the colors that I've used. I don't use all of these colors, but as we go through the tutorial, I will tell you what I have used for each part and if I've mixed them. There's a few different brushes here. You don't need this many brushes. If you do find that painting has become quite an avid hobby, you can certainly invest in more, but just to show you, there are a few different sizes and different types. There's flat brushes, round brushes, fan brushes, which are those ones on the right. I'm also going to use a toothbrush, and I'm going to use some earbuds or some ear sticks. And you're going to need 2 pots of water. It just helps to keep your brushes nice and clean. And the brushes here at the bottom, the ones with the white, sort of grey white tips, they're actually makeup brushes. So they're quite soft, and I use these brushes mostly for dry brushing or for blending, just to smooth out any streaky bits that we have. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is sketch in our tree. The trunk should be in the middle, and each side should be on each side of that middle divider. We want the trunk in the middle, we want the tree to be the centerpiece, and then we will paint in each one of those sections. So I've divided my canvas into 4 squares, and I'm just sketching some branches. You don't have to sketch in all of the branches. This is just to give you a rough guide of what each panel will look like. And then it'll help us when we want to connect our tree together to make it look like one tree. Your branches certainly don't have to look exactly like mine, but the trunk does need to be the thickest part of the tree. And then the branches are thick and then taper off into much thinner lines as the branches grow out. I'm sticking on my painter's tape here. I have used quite a thick one this time. I just didn't want to it's my birdie, makes a cameo. He's always very interested in what I'm painting, so he usually hangs out with me on my shoulder while I'm painting. All right, we're starting with our first panel. This is the summer panel. I've started with some aqua blue and I've cut it with some water, and you can see it dribbling there. I've added a little bit too much. Try not to add too much water. But the reason I do that is because acrylics dry quite quickly. So if you want to be able to blend them or have a little bit more time to blend them, you need to add some water. Just a little bit, and it'll depend on the type of paint you have as well. I've started with the aqua blue and then added in some white at the bottom. I want the top of the canvas to be darker, and then the bottom of that panel, I want it to be lighter. The aqua blue is going straight on the top, and then you can see I'm pulling it down. So the majority of the paint, when I load my brush, I'm starting at the top because that'll make it the bluest when the brush is loaded up. And then I'm pulling it down just with swipes to the right, to the left. I went in down the bottom and added in some white. Same technique, load up my brush with white, start at the bottom and then pull it into the middle. And that will give you that nice blended dark blue to that light blue. With the clouds, I'm using one of those makeup brushes, just a little round fluffy brush. It's very soft. And I have used just white for the top of the clouds, and I start with the top and load up my brush because that's when I want to use the most white. The top of the clouds should be white, and then they fade as they get lower. I've gone back in with some of that aqua blue as well. You can see some of the shadows I've done underneath the clouds, and that gives it a little bit of depth and texture. All your clouds don't have to look the same, and they certainly don't have to look exactly like mine. Just remember to start quite bright at the top, because that's where your clouds will be brightest and whitest, and then let them fade. And don't be afraid if you just want to use white and then just fade them out, that's okay. If you want to go in with that aqua blue and do a few more shadows, you can do that as well and give that a go. Now I'm just extending my branches. I'm using burnt umber, which is a dark brown, cut with a little bit of water. Because if you cut it with a tiny bit of, depending on how thick your paint is, if you cut it with a little bit of water, you can usually get a sharper line. I'm using a very fine liner brush here. You can see that it's quite small and it's quite thin. And I'm just extending those branches to create the basic shape of our tree. Now I'm going with some highlights. This is white mixed with a tiny little bit of burnt umber to create a very light brown. I'm trying to stick to one side, so you'll notice the right side of the trunk and each branch. I'm trying to do my highlights on the right side. If it's not perfect, that's okay, because trees are not perfect and the highlights on it shouldn't be perfect either. That highlight was on the left. I am going to include a sun in the top left corner, so I am trying to think about where I think the light might hit. But you can see how those highlights bring those branches to life and make them start to look a little bit more realistic. Now I'm going in with it's a really shabby brush. I think I've given it a haircut at some point as well for some reason. And I have mixed in a sap green, so a sort of a leafy green or an emerald green. Mix that in with a little bit of black, and this is our base. So we want some depth in our leaves. And I guess the best tip I can give you is see how I'm doing the base patchy and you can still see a lot of the branches. That's always going to make for a better tree. If you fill up all of your branches and you can't see anything behind it, the tree does look quite full and it looks nice, but it's also nice if you can see some of those trunks as well. This is a bit of a different and fun technique. If you have ear sticks or earbuds at home, that is just a medium cool green that I have, and that is to create the highlights. I'm trying to leave some of that depth in there, so we've got a little bit of variety and you can start to see the layers. And the lighter, I'm trying to do more of the highlights on top. Now I'm going in with that makeup brush again, very soft makeup brush. If you don't have this brush, that's okay, as long as it's sort of small. Perhaps a filbert brush. A filbert brush is sort of a flat brush that is rounded on the end. And I've mixed that green, that medium green that I used for those highlights, I've mixed that in with a little bit of yellow, a little bit of cool yellow, and a little bit of white. And I'm just trying to stick to doing highlights on the top of the tree. On the top and the edges, that's where most of the light's going to hit. You can play around with it a bit if you feel like you've highlighted a little bit too much. That's totally okay. Go back in with your darker green and create more depth, or you can go back in with your medium green and create a little bit more depth. You can wait for it to dry and do it again. The key is just to create, and see I'm doing a few more shadows. I thought I'd lost a little bit of the depth there, so I'm just going back in, doing a few more highlights, a few more shadows. You can still see some of the sky and some of those clouds through the tree, which I think is important. You want to see some of the branches and you definitely want to see some of that beautiful sky. That up the top is white mixed in with a tiny little bit of cool yellow. I'm just creating a sun. And then right at the end, I do love my sun rays. So right at the end, we'll create some sun rays, but we'll let that dry. So now I'm taping off the right side, the top right panel. This will actually be a little bit easier for you if you're right-handed. I know most people out there are probably right-handed. I'm left-handed. So I started on the left side. If you're starting on the left side and you're right-handed, you'll actually find this a lot easier because you can lean on the part of the canvas that doesn't have any paint yet. So I have to be really careful not to press too hard on the left side. And I've gone through and used a hairdryer to dry that left side before I put the tape on. So I'm blending. This is the same technique that I used for the summer panel. I started with a darker blue. It's the same aqua blue that I used for the sky and the summer panel, but I've added some black. And I've started with that in the middle. Right up the top, I've gone in with just black and then pulled down into the blue. And then at the bottom, I've gone in with white and pulled up. And then I've done a few sweeps and streaks, diagonal sweeps and streaks to give it that nice faded look and a little bit of streaky sky. Then to do those stars, nice and simple. All you need is a toothbrush and put some white paint on your toothbrush. Hold the toothbrush maybe about 5 centimeters away from the canvas or a couple of inches away from the canvas, and use your finger to flick the bristles forward, and you'll get this really beautiful starry night look. To create those stars, pretty simple stuff. I've flipped over a brush and dipped it into white paint, and I'm using the end of that brush to just dot in some stars. If you don't want to create twinkle stars, you don't have to. You can just use the back of your brush and leave those little white dots. That'll still look beautiful. I wanted to make a few twinkly stars. The key to making those stars look good is to make sure that you don't use too much white. Some of them should be brighter. That one that I'm doing right now, you can sort of see through it. It's a bit faded, so it looks like it might be in the distance. And the other tip is make sure that the top, the bottom, and the left and the right lines are longer than that cross diagonal. So you can see how the tops and the bottoms and the sides are the longest parts. And then when I've done that cross in the middle, they're a little bit shorter. Now I'm going in with black and a thin liner brush and extending our branches. Here all you need to use is black, and it's the same technique as we used for the summer panel, for the branches in the summer panel. So the branches that are closer to the trunk need to be thicker, and then as they grow out, they get thinner and thinner. Now I'm going in with white, not mixed with anything, just white. My black paint is still a little bit wet, which I actually like because it creates some good textures on the branches. Same technique, trying to stick to one side, I'm sticking to the right side. Doesn't have to be perfect. If you accidentally do a highlight on the left side, it's fine. But just I'm not using a lot of pressure, so you can see that my line is not too heavy, and it's sometimes a little bit streaky or dotted or squiggly, and that's okay because I think that makes the tree look natural. Now I'm going in with some grey, so just mixed some black and white together to create a bit of a medium grey colour. And just doing a few more touches, a few more highlights. Now the next two panels, we'll have to try and line up the branches. Now we're on to the spring panel. I did do the panel to begin with, and it wasn't quite as I envisaged it. So I wanted to go over it again and start again, and that's the wonder of acrylics. You can do that. I just dried it. Now I'm going in with some magenta, a little bit of violet, and some white. Similar technique to both the top panels, except this time I'm using diagonal strokes and sweeps to create that streaky look. Just a different direction, different feel. There's also a little bit of neon pink in there as well, those brighter bits. Same technique, just start with your magenta, do some swipes, go with your white, do some swipes. Just try not to blend it too much because then it'll become one color, and you don't want that. You want to be able to see the different pigments and different distinctions between the whites and the pinks and the different shades. Now to create the color of the trunk, all I've done is use a dark violet. And I've peeled off some of the paint just so I can line up those branches so it looks like the one tree. Once I've lined up those branches and even lined up some of those leaves, you can see the leaves of the summer panel at the top. It's sort of only half of that little bushy area. So I'm going to go through and just make sure that I've created the rest of that because we want it to look cohesive. There I am doing it now. I'm just using a liner brush because it's a little bit more accurate. So I'm not using a flat brush or anything big or anything too large that might bleed into the summer panel. So I've just tried to connect all of those so I can give me a guide. I haven't gone all the way up because now I can fill in those gaps. I just needed to see where those trees or where those leaves or branches finish, just to make sure that I can make it look like the one tree and it all connects together nicely. Now I'm going in again with the same violet, nothing mixed with nothing, just that vibrant violet color. If you don't have this particular color, that's fine. You can use maybe a purple mixed in with a little bit of black, or a magenta mixed in with a little bit of black, as long as it's dark and it pops against the background. You could use black if you really wanted to. Now I'm just creating branches. So same technique as all the other panels we've done so far. And the violet is going to be my base for everything, and then we're going to put highlights over it. I'm going in with white. The violet is still quite wet, so it blends in and you can still see some of the depth through that, which I think is nice. I'm going in with white, and I'm also going in with some neon pink. I'm using a liner brush here instead of a stipple brush or that shabby brush that I used for the leaves in the top summer panel. I wanted a little bit more control over where I put the highlights and where I put the shadows and the depth. The bottom of the tree is a bit more delicate because there aren't as many leaves and there aren't as many branches, and I wanted to create a particular shape because we're tapering it down now because this is closer to the ground and closer to the bottom of the trunk. I've used white and I've used some magenta for the shadows and highlights. Now I'm going in using that same technique that I did for the stars. I'm using the end of a brush, just dipping it into neon pink and then dotting it onto the leaves so that they look like perhaps little rosebuds or little twinkling lights. This has a bit of a fantasy feel to it, so it doesn't have to be completely and totally realistic. Now I'm going to do some foliage and shrubs at the bottom. I've started with a cool red mixed in with a little bit of pink just so that it matches those tones, and just creating the base of our foliage and our shrubs. I'm using the same makeup brush that I used for the highlights in the summer panel at the top. Going in with some shadows, a little bit more red. And again, your bushes and shrubs and foliage do not have to look exactly like mine. They can look a little bit different. Going in with some white. I'm using white here not only to create a contrast, but because the paint is still wet, the white tends to blend in with the reds and the pinks, and it creates those different colors anyway. Now I'm using a very thin liner brush, and I'm loading my brush with violet and then flicking up to create individual little blades of grass or a sort of plant. Now I'm going to highlight the trunk of the tree and the branches, going in with white again to do that. This is the same technique that I've used for the other branches, just using different colors. I wanted the highlights to be on the edge of the trunk, so the outer edges of the trunk, because I figured that's where the light would hit first. Putting a few leaves, little white leaves on those buds, creates a nice little detail, gives us a little bit more contrast against that streaky background. Now I'm creating some leaves on our blades at the bottom, using a very small thin liner brush, and I'm loading up my brush with some neon pink and some white, then placing pressure onto the canvas and then pulling away and flicking, and that creates those leaves. highlighting some of those little white leaves a little bit, just so they blend in a bit more. A few more flicks. When you do your highlights on your tree, those different lines that I've done, I haven't used a lot of pressure, and that's what creates those little squiggles. So all you need to do is draw your brush up and create a few lines, and then you'll definitely have a very similar look to what I've got. This is the autumn panel. I wanted it to look a bit fiery. So we're starting with some red. I've mixed in a little bit of pink with that red, or a little bit of yellow, just so it's not just pure red. I wanted it to be a little bit orange because we are going to use red in the tree. So I've started with my darker color at the bottom, which is my cool red mixed in with a little bit of cool yellow. And then I've cleaned my brush. So make sure you're cleaning your brush between when you're blending, because otherwise if you pick up too much of the red or the darker color, then when you pull the yellow, it'll start to become orange. You can see me cleaning my brush in between each time. So I started with the reddy yellow orange color at the bottom. Then I cleaned my brush, went up the top with the bright yellow, and then you sort of meet them in the middle. I wanted these strokes to be almost look fiery and bold, so that's why they're bold strokes, and that's why I'm loading up my brush a lot, and I'm trying to leave some of those streaks. I wanted it to look different. The sweeping spring faded background is quite whimsical, and the night sky is quite dramatic, and the blue sky is very calming, so I wanted this to kind of match the colors of autumn, be a little bit fiery. Now I'm doing the trunk, so I'm using red here, and I've peeled that back so I can make sure that all the branches meet up. I'm loading up my brush with one corner of my brush has a bit of red on it, and then I'm dabbing it into a little bit of cool yellow, and it creates that nice streak, so you already start to have some texture in the tree. Now I'm using burnt umber, which is the same brown that we used for the summer panel. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm using similar colors, even though each one of these panels is very different and very distinct. I'm trying to use some similar colors so that it all sort of ties in together. Now I'm just marking where those branches are to make sure that they all line up. And once I've marked in where they are and they all line up, then I'll put the sticky tape back. And that will protect that winter panel. Just remember, every time you do a new panel, you do need to let your paint dry completely. So if you have a hairdryer around and you'd like to use a hairdryer to speed up that process, you can. Just make sure it's not too hot. If not, you can go away and have a break, and you can come back and do one of the other panels once it's dried. So now I'm going in with my burnt umber, mixing in with that red, creating some texture on the ground. You can see while the paint is still wet, it does create these nice different looking layers and textures and lines and shapes in the trunk. So it already starts to look like a tree. Sometimes when we paint, we want to paint while it's still wet so we can create that texture or a particular look or pattern or shape. And sometimes we want to wait until it's dry. Extending all of my branches out. Thicker when they're closer to the trunk, and then as they taper off, they should be thinner. Now I'm highlighting with some cool red, not really mixed in with anything, just red. And again, putting my highlights where I think the most light would hit. The light would probably hit on the outer edge of the tree, extending some of my branches with that red as well. And I know the seasons aren't in order. We actually have opposites, but I wanted the left side of the painting to have little different buds, flowered buds and leaves, and I wanted the right side to have a lack of leaves. Now I'm using that same technique that I did for the medium green in the summer panel, and I'm going in with some burnt umber, some cool red, and some cool yellow, and creating what looks like some leaves on the ground. I'm also using it to create some foliage, and that matches the other side, sort of matches the canvas, sort of matches the spring panel of the canvas. And the darker colors should be on the edge, and then the lighter highlight colors should be on the top, and that's why I've got that yellow there, yellow and then red and then brown at the bottom. I wanted a few leaves on the tree when it's autumn or fall, if you use that terminology. There are some leaves on the tree, but they're in the process of falling off. So I used my earbuds or ear sticks just to fill in a few. Going in with a little bit of white, and that white is blending in with the wet paint, so it gives it that nice orangey red tinge. Last but not least, doing a few more yellow highlights on the tree just to create those layers and tie everything in. The next thing I do is optional. I happen to have some they're little gold pieces of foil that are used to stick on paintings and create a different texture, or use a different medium or a different tool. So I do go in and I stick some of those on. I thought they would be pretty as some final touches. If you don't have those, that's totally okay. You don't have to use those. Now I'm just using some black as the very, very last parts of the shadowing. I want some depth and some shadows. I wanted a bit more definition because we are using similar colors in this entire panel as we have with some of the other panels. So you want to make sure there are some distinctions, but also we've got the black above in the winter panel. So it's nice to be able to tie all those colors in together. If you look at the trunk, the left side is the darkest bit, and that's where the black is, and that will match up, well, it will kind of correlate very nicely or align very nicely with the dark violet that's on the other side of the trunk. Now I am starting to stick on my gold flakes. Like I said, if you don't have these, they're absolutely not essential. They were just something I wanted to experiment with because I happen to have some. They look very pretty, very shiny when you have a look at the actual painting. And I just thought that they would be nice because they look like leaves that are falling on the ground or leaves that are in the tree. Last but not least, I wanted to go in with some sun rays. I do love my sun rays. I think it's just a nice finishing detail. And to do that, I am using a flat brush, and I'm using it on its edge for those sharp lines, and then I'm using it flat to create that faded look that's closest to the sun. The key to doing sun rays is to make sure that you take a lot of paint off of your brush. So load your brush, but then make sure that you wipe off a lot of the paint, because otherwise the line might be too thick or too dark. And we do want to see some of that tree behind those sun rays. And that's it. There you have it. Finished product. Thank you very much, and see you later. If you painted along with me today, that is absolutely wonderful, and I'd love to hear from you. If you didn't, that's okay, but thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.